I grew up believing I was the problem, the quiet daughter, the inconvenient memory of my father. When my mother remarried, she moved my sister to Europe and left me behind with my grandmother. Felt like disposal. What I didn't know was this. My grandmother was watching. And on my 22nd birthday, she handed me the documents that changed everything. Complete control of our family's $60 million hotel empire. My name is Emily Reed. I'm 22 years old, and I never thought my life would be about hotel portfolios and courtroom battles. I thought it would be about light and space and the way a room can make you feel before you even speak. I've always seen the world in structures and shadows, in lines that hold things up and the empty spaces between them where the truth usually hides. It's why I think I saw the cracks in my own family long before anyone else admitted they were there. It started in Brighton, Maine, in a house that felt more like a showroom than a home. I was 17, curled in the window seat of the sunroom, a sketchbook propped on my knees. I was drawing a treehouse, something whimsical and impossible, with spiraling staircases and glass walls looking out onto an imaginary forest. The graphite smudged my fingers a familiar, calming gray. Then I heard the low murmur of voices in the foyer. Not the usual arguing. This was different. Final. I padded down the hallway, my socks silent on the polished wood. And I saw him. My dad, Daniel. His one suitcase, the battered leather one we used for weekend trips to the lake, stood by the front door like a tombstone. His shoulders were slumped, a map of defeat I'd never seen on him before. He turned, saw me, and his face just broke. He crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling me into a hug so tight I could feel his heart hammering against my ribs. He smelled of his aftershave and something else, something sour and sad. He whispered into my hair, his voice thick and ragged. "I'm so sorry, I love you. Take care of your sister. Be good." The words tumbled out, a desperate, jumbled prayer. Then he let go. He picked up that suitcase, opened the door, and stepped into the twilight. He didn't look back. I stood frozen, watching his silhouette get smaller until it vanished. And then I looked at my mother, Laura. She was standing at the foot of the staircase, one hand resting on the newel post. Her expression wasn't grief. It wasn't anger. It was a cool, clean satisfaction. The look you get when you finally manage to close a drawer that's been sticking for years. She met my eyes, gave a small, dismissive sigh, and walked upstairs without a word. That was the moment the foundation of my world split right down the middle. 3 months later, she brought Evan Cross home. He was all polished surfaces, Italian shoes that shone like dark mirrors, a watch that probably cost more than my dad's car, and a smile that arrived a half-second too early and stayed a half-second too long. It never quite reached his eyes, which were the pale, calculating blue of a winter sky. He was a global strategist, she said, her voice bubbling with a lightness I hadn't heard in years. He was going to help us grow, expand, become something truly spectacular. Evan was a master of subtle geography. He immediately mapped the emotional landscape of our house and claimed his territories. My little sister, Ruby, who was 12 and all soft edges and longing for a father figure, he placed firmly in the kingdom of Princess. He brought her gifts from his trips, remembered her favorite ice cream, called her his little gem. With me it was different. I was the quiet one, the one who watched, the one who resembled my father. To Evan, I was a shadow in the corner of a bright room. He'd acknowledge me with a faint, patronizing nod, his gaze sliding over me as if I were a piece of furniture that didn't quite match the new decor. My mother's treatment followed his lead. Conversations would die when I entered the room. Plans were made over dinners I wasn't invited to. I was being slowly, carefully erased from the new version of our family. Then, one evening over a painfully quiet dinner, they made it official. Evan, with a theatrical sweep of his hand, announced their bold new vision. A European expansion of the family business. An anchor property in Amsterdam. A chance to build a legacy. My mother clasped his hand, her eyes shining with a devotion she'd never shown my father. And Ruby, of course, was coming. Her education would be international, elite. She clapped, thrilled at the adventure. I put my fork down, the clink too loud in the sudden silence. "And me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. My mother turned that cool gaze on me. She spoke as if she were explaining a simple logistics problem. "It wouldn't be suitable for my final year of high school," she said. "The disruption." And Grandma Lorraine had been asking for company at the main estate in Vermont. It was a perfect solution. Temporary, of course. Just until things were settled. Just until things were settled. It was a sentence of exile, delivered with the clinical precision of a surgeon removing a benign but bothersome growth. No discussion. No apology. Just disposal. I looked at Evan, and for the first time I saw it. Not just dismissal, but a flicker of pure, unguarded triumph. He was removing the one person in the house who looked at him and didn't see a savior. He saw a question mark. What I didn't understand then, what I would only piece together later, was my mother's real motive. It wasn't just about starting fresh with a new man. She wasn't just threatened by me as a reminder of my father. She was threatened by the part of me that was a carbon copy of her own mother, Grandma Lorraine. The woman who had built our family's $60 million boutique hotel empire not from boardrooms, but from the soil of Vermont, with stubbornness and heart, and an unshakable belief in creating places that felt like home. My mother had always chafed under that legacy, wanted something sleeker, colder, more impressively global. And in me, she saw Lorraine's spirit waking up. She saw the heir, not to her new life, but to the old one she was desperate to leave behind. So I was sent to Vermont, to the source. For 4 years, Grandma Lorraine's sprawling, rambling estate, the original Reed's Rest, was my sanctuary. It was the opposite of my mother's cold minimalism. All warm, worn wood, overstuffed armchairs that hugged you, and the constant, gentle smell of baking bread and pine logs from the fireplace. The silence here wasn't empty, it was peaceful. I buried myself in architecture school, my pain and confusion finding an outlet in blueprints, in load-bearing calculations, in the poetry of clean lines and intentional space. Grandma Lorraine was a quiet presence. She didn't pry. She just saw me. She'd leave a mug of hot cocoa by my drafting table late at night, or take me on long walks through the property, pointing out how she'd positioned the main lodge to catch the morning sun, or how the original chimneys were built from local stone. It was a different kind of education. My mother's calls were rare, brief, and full of the distant buzz of her exciting new life. Ruby visited when school breaks allowed, but she was changing, becoming a polished echo of our mother. Her conversations peppered with names of places and brands that felt foreign to me. I learned to stop expecting anything from Laura. The hope had been cauterized. Then on the morning of my 22nd birthday, everything changed. Grandma Lorraine asked me to meet her in her office after breakfast. This wasn't the corporate office in the city. This was the heart of the empire, a room built into the oldest part of the inn. It was lined floor to ceiling with walnut shelves, crammed with ledgers, leather-bound guest books dating back decades, and models of various properties. The air smelled of old paper, lemon polish, and her faint rose perfume. She was seated behind her massive scarred desk, her hands resting on a thick cream-colored folio. She looked at me, her eyes the same sharp gray as mine, holding a depth of emotion that made my breath catch. "Emily," she said, her voice steady but soft. All of this now belongs to you." She slid the folio toward me. My hands trembled as I opened it. It wasn't just a document. It was a universe. Deeds to 12 unique boutique hotels and the vast Vermont estate. Trust documents. Share certificates for Reed Hospitality Group. Operating agreements. A history and a future printed on heavy official paper. I felt the blood drain from my face. I couldn't speak. This was impossible. My mother and Evan were running the company, spearheading the European expansion. How could any of this be mine? Grandma Lorraine leaned back in her chair, the leather sighing beneath her. She exhaled, and with that breath, she released a truth she had held for years. She had waited, she explained, her words measured and heavy. She had hoped, she had prayed, that her daughter would mature, would remember where she came from. But Laura had discarded my father, a good and honest man, for a glittering illusion. And then she had discarded me, her own flesh and blood, for the sake of a new shiny status. And now, through the trusted contacts Lorraine still had within the company, she knew Laura was letting Evan gamble the family legacy. He was leveraging properties, taking out risky overseas loans for the Amsterdam project, moving money in ways that made her veteran financial advisor blanch. "This," Grandma said, gesturing to the folio, "is not just an inheritance, Emily. It is a rescue mission. I am giving you the tools to save what your mother is trying to sell." The room spun. The weight of it, the betrayal, the responsibility, was a physical pressure on my chest. She urged me to do one more thing. To see my father. To hear his side of the story, now that I was old enough to understand the landscape of adult deception. It took me a week to gather the courage. I met him at a small sun-drenched cafe in a town halfway between his new life and mine. When I saw him leaning against his car, his hair more gray than brown, his shoulders carrying a permanent weariness, something in me cracked open. But then he saw me, and his smile, it was like the sun breaking through a decade of clouds. It was the same smile that had read me bedtime stories, that had cheered at my awkward middle school art shows. It warmed every frozen, fractured part of my heart. Over coffee that grew cold, the truth, the real, ugly, breathtaking truth, came tumbling out. His affair, the financial discrepancy that had cost him his job and his reputation, it was all a meticulously crafted frame. Evan had used his contacts to plant the evidence. My mother had provided the access, the credibility, and the final devastating accusation. They had painted him as incompetent and corrupt to force him out of the business, to sever his legal and emotional ties to her, and to clear the path for Evan. He didn't leave us for another woman or a failure of nerve. He was pushed out, blackmailed with the threat of public scandal that would hurt Ruby and me, to protect us in the only way he had left, by removing himself. He hadn't abandoned me. He had been sacrificed. The pain of that truth was a cleaver, sharp and clean, severing the last fragile tie of doubt I had about my mother. The woman was capable of orchestrated ruin. And she had started with her own husband. 2 days after that meeting, the legal transfer was complete. I was the majority owner of Reed Hospitality. I sat in Grandma's sunroom, the same one where I used to sketch, staring at the lake, trying to fit this new immense reality inside my old self. I didn't have to wait long to feel its weight. They arrived like a sudden storm. A rental car crunching on the gravel drive, doors slamming with purpose. My mother and Evan swept into the grand foyer of the main house, dripping with a performance of affection. Laura's embrace was stiff, her perfume overwhelming. Evan clapped a heavy hand on my shoulder, his smile wider and emptier than ever. They talked of fresh starts, of being a family again, of how they'd cut their trip short the moment they heard about the transfer. They were here to help me, guide me, support poor, young, inexperienced Emily. They'd even brought their things, Evan mentioned casually, in the car. They could move into the East Wing, be right here on hand. The audacity was breathtaking. The parasites, smelling the richest blood, had returned to the host. My heart was a drum in my throat, but I heard my own voice, calm and surprisingly steady, cut through their rehearsed concern. No, I said. Thank you, but no. The silence that followed my single simple word was louder than any of their talking. My mother's smile stiffened, a crack appearing in her perfect porcelain facade. Evan's hand slipped from my shoulder, and his eyes, those winter blue eyes, lost their false warmth, turning assessing and cold. Parasites, I thought again, don't give up easily. They just find a softer spot to burrow. Laura recovered first, letting out a light, tinkling laugh that sounded like breaking glass. Sweetheart, you're overwhelmed. This is a lot for anyone, let alone a young woman just out of school. You need experienced people. Family. That word, family, coming from her lips was the spark. It ignited a cold fire in my gut. I looked at her, really looked, past the expensive blonde highlights and the newly tweaked profile. I saw the architect of our ruin. I took a slow breath, the scent of the old house, wood smoke and lemon instability, filling my lungs, grounding me. Why did you do it, Mom? I asked, and my voice didn't shake. Why did you frame Dad? Why did you lie about the affair? Why did you spend years making me believe the best man I ever knew was a liar and a cheat who abandoned us? The color drained from her face, leaving 2 spots of high, furious red on her cheeks. The mask didn't just crack this time. It shattered into a million pieces, blown apart by the force of her own rage. Who have you been talking to? She hissed, her voice dropping, ugly and guttural. That pathetic man? He filled your head with poison because he's a failure. He couldn't provide, he couldn't grow, he was holding us back. She was screaming now, her words bouncing off the vaulted ceiling. Curses and accusations I won't repeat. She claimed everything, the business, the houses, the legacy was hers. By birthright. That Grandma was a senile old woman I had manipulated. And I was a conniving, ungrateful child trying to steal what I could never earn. Evan stood beside her, a silent pillar of support, his arm around her shoulders, his gaze fixed on me with a venomous promise. This was their script. The hysterical, betrayed mother and the steadfast new husband, facing down the greedy, manipulative daughter. But they hadn't written Grandma Lorraine into this scene. The door to her office, which had been slightly ajar, swung open silently. And there she stood. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to posture. She simply emerged, a quiet storm in a cashmere cardigan and pearls, and the very air in the foyer changed, grew heavier, charged. She looked at her daughter, and there was no anger in her face, only a profound, bone-deep disappointment, and a final, unshakable resolve. Laura's tirade died in her throat under that look. Lorraine's voice was low, calm, and every syllable was a wrecking ball hitting its mark. You are not welcome in this house, Laura. You forfeited your rights to this business the day you chose a con man over your own blood, and the day you conspired to destroy a good man to cover your own shame. You will leave now. Our lawyers will be in touch with you tomorrow. You no longer have signing authority on any account. You no longer have a position. You have nothing here. My mother stared, her mouth a perfect, stunned oh. She looked from Lorraine to me to Evan, as if waiting for someone to yell cut, to reveal this was all a terrible scene in a play. But the set was real. The consequences were real. Evan finally spoke, his smooth strategist voice trying to regain control. Now Lorraine, let's be reasonable. There are procedures, shareholder votes. Grandma cut him off without even glancing his way. I am speaking to my daughter. You are a stranger in my home. The security gate at the end of the drive has already been instructed. Please see yourselves out. It was the most breathtaking display of power I had ever witnessed. No theatrics, just the immutable force of truth and ownership. They left, of course, Evan guiding a shaking, silent Laura out the door, his final look back at me not of defeat, but of a war that had merely entered a new phase. I knew with a chilling certainty that this wasn't over. What followed was a period of cold, meticulous war, fought with paper and subpoenas instead of shouts. At Grandma's direction, a team of forensic investigators and a fiercely loyal legal firm began the careful, orchestrated uncovering of truth. They peeled back the glossy layers of Evan Cross and found nothing but rot and reinvention. The global strategist was a career con artist. His real name wasn't even Evan Cross. He had a history of attaching himself to family-run businesses, charming his way in, and bleeding them dry through complicated loan schemes and offshore transfers before disappearing. His European expansion was a masterclass in fraud. The Amsterdam property was a money pit, a front to secure millions in loans that were immediately siphoned away. And the most damning evidence of all, my mother's signature was on every document, every approval, every loan guarantee, every transfer of collateral. She wasn't his dupe. She was his accomplice. She had handed him the keys to her own family's vault and helped him carry the treasure out. The court proceedings were a brutal, clinical dismantling. We sat in a sterile room, my father, Grandma, our lawyers on one side, my mother, Evan, and their increasingly flustered counsel on the other. Ruby, now 16, sat with us, her hand in mine, her face pale and solemn. She had chosen a side, and it had broken her heart to do it, but seeing the evidence laid out in black and white had left her no choice. The judge, a stern woman with tired eyes, reviewed the investigator's report, the evidence of Evan's aliases, the fraudulent mortgages, the attempts to drain equity from Grandma's Vermont properties. She listened to my father's testimony, calm and factual, about the setup that cost him his family. She saw the bank records, the signatures. It was an open and shut case of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted asset stripping. But the moment that will haunt me forever came next. Our lawyer, a kind but steely woman named Miriam, stood and quietly submitted a petition for a change in custody for Ruby, given the evidence of Laura's instability and involvement in serious financial crimes. The judge granted it on the spot. Full legal and physical custody to Daniel Reed. My mother's reaction was a spectacle of crumbling artifice. First, the calculated, beautiful tears, the pleas of a mother being torn from her child. But when the judge remained unmoved, citing her demonstrated lack of judgment and fiduciary responsibility, the tears evaporated. The fury returned raw and shrieking. She called my father a pauper, called me a puppet, called Grandma a vindictive witch. She stood up, pointing, screaming that we had stolen her life. And through it all, Evan Cross sat perfectly still, his face a blank mask, already calculating his exit. He was a man who knew when an asset was irredeemably toxic. Her carefully crafted victim act collapsed right there in the courtroom, like a house of cards in a sharp wind. Justice, when it came, was swift and hollow. Criminal charges were filed. A restraining order was issued to keep them from the properties and from us. Evan disappeared within 24 hours of the verdict, leaving no forwarding address. He did, however, manage to empty every last dollar from my mother's personal savings and the joint accounts on his way out. The final exquisite betrayal. She was left with nothing. No husband, no company, no savings, and only supervised visitation rights with a daughter who looked at her with a confusion that was slowly hardening into resentment. For the first time in her meticulously curated life, my mother had to face consequences she couldn't lie, charm, or scheme her way out of. Weeks later, my father called me. His voice steady but quiet. She had shown up at his new apartment, he said. No makeup, looking older than her years. She begged for forgiveness, talked about second chances, about family therapy, about vague promises of making amends. She said she had been manipulated, that Evan had a hold on her. My father, the man she had broken and exiled, simply listened, and when she finished, he told her no. Not with anger, not with vengeance, with a calm, firm finality that brooked no argument. He told her that her amends would be to stay away, to get the help she needed, and to never again try to manipulate her children. He said, "Goodbye, Laura," and closed the door. When he told me that, I finally cried. Not tears of sadness for her, but tears of release for him, for us. It was over. And just like that, the storm passed. Our lives settled into a new steady rhythm, like the lake after a gale, clear and calm. I finished architecture school with honors, my final project a sustainable hotel design that integrated with the Vermont landscape I loved. My father, with his integrity restored and his name cleared, stepped in as the interim CEO at Grandma's request, guiding the company with a cautious, caring hand he'd never been allowed to use before. Ruby thrived in the quiet stability of our dad's home, her spark returning, her laughter real again. Grandma Lorraine, her legacy secured, spent her days in her garden and her office, a deep peace settling around her like a shawl. One Sunday evening, as the autumn sun painted the sky in streaks of orange and purple, we all gathered around Grandma's long oak dining table. The same table where she'd first sketched the plan for Reed's Rest on a napkin decades ago. I spread out the blueprints for my final project, my future of hospitality concept. The pages rustled as my father leaned over, his finger tracing the lines of the solar panel array, the rainwater reclamation system, the communal spaces designed for connection. He was quiet for a long time. Then he looked up at me, and the pride in his eyes, soft and unwavering, softened the last of the weary lines on his face. "This," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is the future. Not skyscrapers in Amsterdam. This, right here." I looked around the table, and my father finally home. At Ruby, sketching in the margin of my blueprint with a smile. At Grandma, watching us all with serene, satisfied eyes. This wasn't the family I was born into. That family was a beautiful, painful fiction. This was the family we fought for. The family we pieced back together from the wreckage, choosing each other, believing each other, staying for each other. It was built not on blood alone, but on truth, on sacrifice, and on a stubborn, fighting love. And it was enough. It was more than enough. Thank you for listening till the very end. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe for more stories like this. And don't forget to rate this story from 0 to 10 in the comments. Your words and reactions inspire me more than you can imagine.